This cooler is to 120mm fans what the D15S is to 140mm fans. In other words, it's squeezing a lot of fan into what is a relatively low height. Welcome to Machines and More. They had to lock the corners off of the NFA 12 though, right? Well, this is a brand new Noctua cooler, and it's certainly very intriguing. The D12L is the latest addition to Noctua's cooler lineup, and the headline feature here is 120mm fan, 145mm tall cooler. Not only that, it's a dual tower. Right? You got two sections here, and for those reasons, it's going to be really appealing to you if you are a mini-itx builder with the right case, and we'll talk about that briefly towards the end of the video. But thanks for your questions on this cooler as well. I'll try my best to address all of these in the review today. And hey, if you're not subscribed yet, please go ahead and do that and click that bell for notifications, and then you can get a sneak peek at all the content, ask questions, and a big thanks if you are ready. Also, big thanks to Noctua for providing this cooler for review today. As always, my reviews are independent, and I'm not paid by the manufacturers for the review content here on the channel. So just for context, 145mm, it's low for a 120mm cooler, but it's not the lowest. For example, if you're in a region where you can get it, the Thermalright SS135 that we looked at not too long ago is 135mm, and also something like the CryoRig H7 does also match it at 145mm. Nevertheless, it is a notable entry in a not very contested space, and in Noctua's own lineup, the other 120mm towers are all 158mm tall. And I think given the overwhelming popularity of the Cooler Master NR200, a lot of folks are actively searching for something that comes within the official spec, which is 153mm with the glass panel and 155mm with a vented panel. Of course, in my testing, I've never had an issue with the Noctua U12A and the vented panel NR200, but your mileage may vary, as I say. I was musing at the fact that the box for this lower cooler is so much taller than the box from the taller Scythe Mugen 5C, which we'll compare against today. But that's because it's an incredibly well-packed cooler, and it will take a lot of work to unpack. But once unpacked, you'll see the heatsink. It weighs in at about 685 grams. Two towers. It's asymmetrical, and one side of the tower, it's thicker than the other. And most likely, this will be the side that you position towards the rear or the I/O end of your motherboard just because of this eccentricity. The inside of the thicker tower, see that? It's very jagged. Presumably to tune the airflow to get the desired turbulence for optimal performance, but I gotta warn you, this is super sharp and you have to be super careful. And reaching in to adjust the fan, I definitely cut my knuckles a few times and twice in the same spot, so be careful. You get a single fan of this combo. This is the modified NFA 12x25. It's got the suffix R added to the name to denote the, I suppose, rounder looking frame here. But this guy is critical to the ensemble working with the 145mm height, because if this fan were still a square, then these corners would bump up against your mounting points and it would raise the overall height beyond the heatsink. But otherwise it looks just like the original square one, and it spins up to 2000 RPM also. The cooler comes with hardware for LGA 11.5X and new LGA 1700 for Alder Lake, and critically for Team Red is only compatible with AM4 and above, above referring to the AM5 socket, which should also use the same mounting holes. I did have a small issue with the review sample in one of my mounting bars. It was threaded funny on the post, and after tightening down, it sheared off. Never had this happen before. In speaking with Noctua, it should be an isolated incident, and in the interest of delivering this review in a timely manner, I was able to continue testing by installing one spare AM8 bar that I had on hand. I stole it from the C14S, and that worked out fine, and Noctua said this approach was okay too, so I wouldn't really worry about this. Of course, they are backed by their 6-year warranty if anything were to happen, and again, never had an issue with any of their coolers, and test a lot of coolers. In the box, you also get NTH1, great paste, a low noise adapter, a second set of clips if you want to add an additional fan to make it a dual fan system, and the most important, owl badge. One thing though is that if you're adding a second fan, at least in the mini-itx context, you're going to be doing that on this side, which is going to be the RAM side, and at that point you're subject to the height of your RAM. So whether you do the same NFA 12 by 25R or a regular square one, it doesn't matter. Since the original fan, that edge is going to rest against the RAM anyway, so these rounded corners, not going to matter there. In my test system, the Corsair LPX RAM, which is low profile RAM, it protruded about 5 millimeters higher than the heat pipe tip. So if you are truly height constrained, take note of that before attempting that dual fan setup. And we'll talk about that performance impact anyway later. But otherwise, since the heatsink sits completely on the inside of the RAM in the single fan configuration, the RAM height is technically unlimited. What might matter though is, as I mentioned, the cooler, it does come with a second set of clips, but they are specifically for the R version of the fan. The holes for the clips are 93 millimeters center to center. So if you want to mount a regular 120 millimeter fan, you're going to have a set of fan clips, such as for the Noctua D12A that I have here, which it fits just fine. But otherwise, it'll be likely more convenient just to order another one of these, and the cost is the same as the square one. Again, we'll get to that decision when we talk about the performance. As far as fan position, you can have that center fan set up as a rear intake, so air going this way, or exhaust, air going that way. And by convention, my NR200 system, which is equipped with an FE NVIDIA card, I do have it set up to intake from the rear of the case, but however you choose to set it up, I would recommend attaching the middle fan directly to this side, the thicker tower, since you do want to maximize the amount of air going through the thicker section here without leaving an air gap. So performance. All right, this is an interesting one to test because in single fan configuration, I think a lot of folks will also be cross-shopping the Scythe Mugen 5 and new version here. I'll be talking about that Mugen 5 Rev C in more detail in an upcoming video, but suffice to say, it's a cooler that, despite the height of 154.5 millimeters, has fit reliably within the NR200P's glass panel. And also throw the Thermalright SS135 into here as a point of comparison. So here I'm testing with the Ryzen 7 5800X, clocked at 4.6 GHz and 1.25 volts, 117 or so watts here. So at a lower noise level of about 2 decibels, that's 1.8 specifically, above the noise floor, the NFA 12 by 25R performs very well. And it's very quiet. The noise pattern is very pleasing even at the higher RPM. And it's slightly besting the Mugen 5 and significantly better than the SS135. At a higher noise level, the D12L is still ahead. The Mugen 5 doesn't improve too much, which is consistent with my testing in the past. For that cooler, the fan usually isn't a limiting factor past a certain point. In fact, I've used the regular NFA 12 on that, and it doesn't really help. But it's a story for another video. But yeah, the performance is roughly in line with a good single tower cooler, even one that is taller. But when you add a second fan, of course, it would be more fair because it now brings the cooler to about 150 millimeters tall. And I think if we compare to some other dual fan 120 millimeter coolers, let's take a look. At the lower noise level, two of these fans, it comes to roughly 1500 RPM, and compared against the reference single tower U12A, same fans, same speed, it does lag behind it by about 4 degrees while it's just a touch off of the Fuma 2. At the higher noise level, same order here, and it is quite an impressive cooler, but keeping in mind, these are noise normalized results. So when we compare the single fan to the push-pull setup, we're actually seeing nearly identical performance, and even readjusted the middle fan so that would be in perfect alignment with the outer fan. Of course, this type of conundrum is not uncommon. Sometimes two fans, they don't necessarily get you better noise normalized performance. Sometimes the heatsink is just not tuned for two fans to run well together. I mean, you have two asymmetrical sections here, right? So unless you need the headroom, since the dual fan setup will get you the most absolute performance irrespective of noise, otherwise, I'd just skip the dual fan setup and just save some change there. Quick noise test here. There's nothing really to note since the NFA 12 by 25 is so well polished and well covered on this channel, but here's just a quick sample for you if you're curious. So overall, I'd say the D12L performs quite well and would work for any consumer CPU right now, but it would be right spec for a Ryzen 7 or Intel i7 level of chip. Okay, so they're basically using the same fans, so what makes this one so much better? Well, first off, the lower height here, it does introduce some compromises when it comes to the heatsink. You got lower heatsink mass, your U12A's got more material. It also has 7 heat pipes. I mean, look at all those heat pipes, right? But more critically is where that heatsink mass is placed. So that 13 millimeters is a pretty important juncture since it encompasses the area where the fan is producing a lot of airflow, the edges, right? And leaving this area open means that a lot of the air is bypassing the heat fins instead of flowing through. So all these factors add up to the difference that we see between the two, and that's just the compromise that you have to make when you have a shorter cooler. And let's not forget, black colored coolers automatically make your CPU run 2 to 3 degrees cooler. I'm kidding, of course, but I'm sure folks will wonder why this guy was not released in Chromax. But if this cooler does prove to be popular enough, I'm sure a Chromax version will follow in the year 2029. Seriously though, I like this cooler. Some recommendations. First off, this price, it's $90 US, so it's high cost, high performance for its high class. But in terms of the utility for this particular height, this is where I'm a little torn. It's kind of in an odd place. For one, it's not low enough to fit into a small case that can take a tower cooler, so something like your NCase M1 Classic, your Sliger S610, which the SS135 fits in the M1 Classic, or you'll have to go something like the U9S, C14S, and well, on the other side of the spectrum, your bigger mini-itx cases such as your vented panel, NR200, your Lianli T150. That league of wider case can take a less compromised 120mm tower, so this really, I don't know why you would go here. So if you're willing to spend $90, then I'd say depending on your CPU needs, either spend an extra $20 for the U12A, which comes with the extra fan, which is worth $30, or just go ahead and get something like the Science Fuma 2 and save some money, and either cooler will perform better than the D12L. As far as 145mm goes, the single case that does come to mind is the Sliger Cerberus, a really cool mini-itx case, which is limited to 148mm. So if you're one of those few that are running a Cerberus, do it. This is the cooler for you. But also those of you that want an officially supported fit with your NR200P's glass panel, this is also a possible contender here, though the Mugen 5, it does typically fit. And as we saw, you're getting similar performance for about $30 to $35 less. Alright, so long story short, while I think Noctua did a great job with the D12L here, I feel the appeal will be somewhat stifled here simply because of the limited number of cases that this specifically caters to. Alright, I'm done. Hope you enjoyed it. Give a like, subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.